Brian Earl Taylor was in trouble. He had more than one warrant against him and was on parole when he was arrested yet again. Caught red-handed with a hostage and a gun, he now faced up to 17 years in jail. But he had a plan that he thought could help. To the tune of Adele's Hello, Taylor broke into soulful song, apologized to the judge, his mom, and the victim of the crime. Unfortunately, it didn't make much of an impression. The judge at one point or another had probably heard it all. We'll discuss what some of these stranger things could be in this episode of the Infographics Show. Craziest things that have happened in courtrooms. For being only 21, Taylor had quite the rap sheet before his November 9th arrest. Apparently, as far as he was concerned, it wasn't long enough. On that fateful November day, he found a 23-year-old male whom he accosted at gunpoint, forced into a vehicle, and took to an apartment to rob. Unfortunately for Taylor, police intercepted him during his plan, resulting in his arrest and a subsequent trial, conviction, and last but not least, sentence. It was during the sentencing portion of his case that things got strange. Most defendants make statements at this time trying to minimize the punishment they'll receive, whether it's an expression of remorse, an insistence of innocence, or the assurance of how the defendant has or will change. These are all commonly seen and quite normal for those awaiting their fate. Singing these, on the other hand, is not. In a collared navy blue shirt, gesturing while cuffed and with eyes often closed, Taylor crooned his message loud and clear. Starting with the "Hello there, Your Honor," he went on to sing, "I want to say I'm sorry for the things I've done, and I'll try to be stronger in this life I chose. But I want you to know that door I closed." He then apologized to all involved many, one might even say too many times. Taylor covered all his bases with a "Your Honor, I'm sorry, and a "To my mother, I'm sorry, and then to the victim, I'm sorry, followed by another "Yes, Your Honor, I'm sorry, for good measure." That's a total of 17 or more sorries in the form of a song, while a nearby lawyer struggled not to laugh. Perhaps it was his lack of vocabulary or that the judge had already made up her mind, but Taylor was handed the full 17 years as punishment, or about a year per sorry sung. While this may or may not have been merely coincidence, her message was clear. It was too late to apologize, too late. While Taylor's singing was crazy, it only gets crazier from here. And while singing did not help, it may not have necessarily worked against him either. The same could be said for Nicholas Roper, however. Roper had been arrested due to a disorderly conduct, and by the day of his trial, his behavior had not improved. He stripped naked in a police van en route to the court, and then refused to enter the room once there. Finally brought inside, he would not plead innocent or guilty or state whether or not he wanted bail, but simply sang "born free." Sadly for Roper, although born free, he would not remain so and was remanded into custody. However, the good news was once inside, if he had the inclination to once again strip down to his birthday suit, no one would likely care. Although for obvious reasons, it would be in his best interests to resist. Roper's story is still far from as crazy can get. When someone gets unruly, for example, the last thing you'd expect is for a judge to use tape. However, Franklin Williams, a 32-year-old convict like Taylor, was less than cooperative in court. At his sentencing, he refused to stop interrupting, although asked to quiet down more than once. While those presiding over the cases of Taylor and Roper showed tolerance and restraint, Cuyahoga County Judge John Russo was less accommodating. After repeating himself again and again, he'd had enough. On his order, multiple deputies surrounded Williams and applied a piece of duct tape that not only covered his mouth but wrapped around his face. Still determined to talk, the convict was heard to mumble "It is what it is" from behind the tape. The incident was caught on camera, and thus the American Civil Liberties Union in Ohio was quick to complain about loss of dignity and so on and so forth. However, right or wrong, Williams' sentencing had continued. Convictions for kidnapping, robbery, theft, misuse of credit cards, and weapon possession, with a side of bad attitude, had earned him 24 years behind bars. But our next story involves behavior even crazier than this, because while Judge Russo may not have had the most patience in the world, Judge Murphy had far less than this. Perhaps it was because it was summertime in Florida and a hot, muggy day, or that during his time at the bench he had heard one bad song or mouthy speech too many. But on a Monday at the court, he quite literally lost his mind. On this day, it was a war of words between him and an assistant public defender, Andrew Weinstock. Weinstock, acting on behalf of his client, stood up to Murphy and refused to waive his client's rights at trial. This did not go over well. Murphy challenged Weinstock to a throwdown out back. Then both men left the court. What transpired next, while not on camera, was broadcast via audio. Out of sight, the judge screamed a challenge, and then there was a thud, followed by yet another until a sheriff deputy intervened. While guessing what took place is not exactly difficult to do, Weinstock would later testify that he was grabbed and hit by Murphy. After the fight was when things got even stranger. The judge re-entered the courtroom, where he was met with a round of applause and sat down, winded, explaining that he was old. Then court proceedings continued, as if nothing out of the ordinary had taken place. Weinstock unsurprisingly failed to appear. This did all eventually catch up to Murphy, however, whose actions got the attention of the Florida Supreme Court. It removed him from his bench, claiming he was both a spectacle and embarrassment to the state judicial system. Believe it or not, our next story is crazier still. As the courtroom is obviously a place of tension, 23-year-old Darius Dabney may have simply been trying to find his inner calm by smoking a blunt or two outside. While his mood may have improved, his odor did not. The judge smelled marijuana and demanded to know who had it, threatening to bring in the dogs to sniff it out. Cornered, Dabney confessed. However, while he admitted to smoking, he insisted none was left. This was untrue, as the judge soon found out. Unable to provide his name and quite obviously high, he was immediately held in contempt. The judge rather thoughtfully told him he would be stripped for processing, and any drugs found would result in a felony. Handing them over beforehand would not. Dabney then produced not one, but 2 bags of weed from his underwear. Asked why he would bring these to court, he explained that he had forgotten them in the car, as if that somehow answered the question. Likely it would take some time for Darius to understand just how serious his situation had almost become. As it was, his lawyer thanked the judge on his behalf, mentioning that although he might not realize it, Darius appreciated her giving him the opportunity to get rid of the drugs. Dabney was not the smartest to bring weed, but you won't believe the things those in these next stories did. In fact, in the case of 39-year-old Lamar Reed, possession of a different kind of substance got him slapped with a felony he never saw coming. Reed was at court on April 20th of 2017, waiting to discuss a traffic violation. As he stood, he held his baseball cap at his side. He briefly turned it over to shuffle with some paperwork, and out fell a tiny white bag. As can be seen on the security footage, despite an officer standing nearby and several others around, none were the wiser. Since he left court without reclaiming the bag, Reed appeared oblivious as well. However, around an hour later, the bag was discovered, its contents were tested, and identified as cocaine. Authorities then traced back through the footage to find the owner of the substance. Reed, who entered the court thinking the worst outcome would be a fine, was issued a warrant for his arrest. As the judge would later say, it was not a good day for Lamar Reed. Now, what's crazier than bringing drugs to court? Well, while Reed was busted inside of the courtroom in his absence, attorney Charles Ramsey was arrested within one while very much present. In fact, he was representing a client on trial for murder at the time. During the case, Ramsey had already been drawing attention to himself with a strange opening statement, mentions of inadmissible evidence and irrelevant questions, as well as needing moments to, as he put it, calm down. His arrest, however, was based on the fact that cocaine had been found on a table he had used on a break, which led to the seizure of 5 grams from his belongings. Yes, an attorney had brought drugs to his job and snorted them on recess at a trial. The scandal bought his client some time, but Ramsey was charged with multiple felonies, and his time as a free man was over. Not sure it can get crazier than this? Let's find out what happens to those who try to run. After all, while many in court seemingly accept their fate, there are some who are a little less stoic. Tanner Jacobson and Cody Howard in a courtroom in Chehalis, Washington, are 2 such men. As the 2 fled Judge Buzzard's courtroom in cuffs, the judge, pausing to remove his robe, took off in hot pursuit. He caught Howard in the stairwell, while Jacobson was nabbed soon after from the streets. While the judge had cause to celebrate his speed, Howard certainly did not. He and Jacobson were given a charge for escape in addition to their others. Unfortunately for Christopher Clay Rudd, his presiding judge in Salt Lake, Utah, was not so quick to snatch him. Fleeing from the courtroom, he either fell or dove over the second-floor railing to go crashing to the ground below. At that point, with a broken leg and pelvis and a fractured skull, his attempt at escape, if that was his intent, was over. Bradley Tout, on the other hand, while jumping over a dock and crashing into walls, sustained less serious injuries, evading 3 guards as well as 2 others. Incredibly, he wasn't wasn't caught. It took him turning himself in before he began the punishment for his crime. Believe it or not, Isaiah J. Jarrett successfully fled court as well after a failed drug test and while in the process of entering custody. He even pulled the fire alarm as he left, forcing a building evacuation and a large-scale distraction. However, as smooth as his move seemed, he really wasn't so clever after all. After escaping court, he went home, where he was obviously found rather quickly. Here are some stories even crazier than those just told, because while some attempt to flee, others choose a different, more aggressive approach. Siale Angalau, for example, was not the type to run. The confirmed member of a gang, he seemed deceptively calm as he rose from his chair at the defendant's table during trial. Then, in a flash, he grabbed his lawyer's pen and ran to the witness stand, stabbing at the man who sat there. A U.S. Marshal, to the horror of those present, fatally shot Angalau and he died. Unfortunately, judges are far from safe in the courtroom either. One was punched multiple times in the nose, eye, and head after denying an emergency injunction. Melissa Hardwick, who had appeared at court due to a charge of domestic violence, removed all doubt to her guilt after rushing the judge in her case. Of course, violence such as this, or worse, is nothing new. Charles Manson, on trial in 1970 for murder, had a violent outburst of his own. After talking back to the judge threatened to have him removed. In response, Manson crouched on the table and sprang at him while holding a pencil in his hand. Fortunately, a quick-acting sheriff knocked him down while two other deputies piled on top. He was then escorted from the room. Crazier than court-based hate are the stories to come, because while violence may take place in court, there are also acts based on love. Though, as far as one Russian man is concerned, the sentiment seems a bit one-sided. This man was attending the sentencing of his then-girlfriend-turned-fiancé for allegedly stabbing him as many as 13 times. The only reason he didn't die was because he fled and got some medical attention. The accused admitted guilt, but claimed that she had no desire for him to die and that she had simply drunk too much. Looking at up to 6 months in jail, her sentencing was postponed when her boyfriend and victim of the crime proposed to her right there in court. While the near murder of a Russian lover may or may not have been intentional, there is no doubt that Ted Bundy deliberately murdered many in cold blood. However, even his trial found a moment of two for love. When Bundy, representing himself, questioned Carol Boone about his character, she smiled and described him as kind. Bundy, known to be a charmer when not a killer, had apparently laid it on thick. Bundy then asked if she wanted to marry him, and she, for some reason or other, said yes. Despite the insistence of authorities that this would not be possible, he found a way, and soon they were man and wife. Bundy had a daughter while on death row and was executed when she was still a child. Now we'll share the very craziest stories of all, when some who are convicted take their own lives. In the case of Slobodan Pralyak, the UN judges had made what he considered the wrong decision. He would serve the 20 years he had been previously sentenced to as punishment for his role in the Balkans conflict of the 90s. Hearing this, he yelled that he was not a criminal and would not accept their verdict. He then, in front of the court, took out a bottle of poison. After drinking it, he later fell ill and died. Michael Marin, a past trader on Wall Street, similarly could not live with this conviction. Found guilty of torching his millions-of-dollar home he could no longer afford, he was shown on camera to cover his head with his hands. He then placed something in his mouth and drank from a bottle. Not long after, he collapsed and died. The cause of death was cyanide. Steve Parsons, while family, friends, and the rest of the court looked on, died from the same poison after a guilty verdict of his own. He began to convulse and passed away in view of all of those present. Many avoid jury duty for several reasons, due to financial hardship, scheduling conflicts, and the belief it will be long, drawn out, and boring. Clearly, although what takes place in a courtroom can be indisputably dull, there are many instances when things can get downright crazy. What's the craziest thing you've ever seen or heard in court? Also, be sure to check out our other video called Bizarre Things That Happen on the Dark Web. Thanks for watching, and as always, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. See you next time.